各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎收看 J 与 J 论坛，由我 Jim 马健，有我们的好朋友 Jim Noteware 一起为我们讨论这个礼拜的时事。Jim, busy week?
Very busy week. Very busy week. At least Texas, or my part of Houston, is coming out of the pandemic. Everybody is very enthused about the new blast off. So the economy is taking off in a lot of good ways.
Absolutely, a lot of activity, a lot of people that want to work. There are a lot of work. Of course, we know that the service industry, hospitality industry, is short on workers. A lot of people claim it's because people are staying home to take the unemployment benefits, but that's not completely true. There's so many factors. Can we discuss a little bit about what you mentioned earlier about Biden's family plan? What do you mean by his family plan?
Well, I'm not sure about the terminology. Is it another of his proposed major legislative initiatives, like the infrastructure plan? I just don't know. Or is it buried in part of something else he's proposing? I hate to be unaware, but I haven't heard of the label, the family plan per se. Maybe I'm missing something. Or is it the sum of a bunch of different elements like childcare and education, things like that? Honestly, I just don't know.
Whatever he calls it, he is not appealing to the left, to the most liberal and progressive of them all. And he is definitely not getting any traction from moderates. So this is still in the honeymoon period of his term. I don't know where it goes from here. I just know that, remember we talked about last week about the investigation into the origins of the virus.
Right.
I think people need to realize no one is sitting here trying to place the blame on a certain country. No matter what the virus came from, we need to find out, like you said, transparency, how and why. And even if we are part of it, we still just simply need to make sure it won't happen again. Would it increase Asian hate? Would it increase hatred to a certain country? Well, facts are facts. If it leaked from a lab that we invested in, we're all in it together. Mm-hmm. We still have to stop it from happening again. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a farce. I think it's a farce that the administration gives it 60 days. The reasoning, rationale, or the justification was it needs to be done quickly. But how could it be done in 60 days when it's been a year and a half and there's a cover up from everyone?
Well, and it won't happen. It can't really happen. We can piece together information from outside, but we can't get to the essence of it unless and until the Chinese government allows international visitors to come in and do an independent assessment. And so far, they have shown no willingness to do that. And even if that occurs now, 18 months after the problem probably began, much of the evidence has been destroyed, gone away. Many of the people are no longer there. At best, it will be a difficult investigation to conduct and conclude. It will be incomplete, almost by definition, because of the absence of evidence. But on the other hand, I cannot understand the Chinese position of not allowing an international group to come in. The obvious conclusion without that is they're hiding something, and or they're very concerned about their narrative not being supported by the investigation. The investigation is going to find other things. And so I think it is what it is. I am just as concerned. I really think that there's two big problems on the Chinese side. Number one, what were they doing conducting that research to begin with? For what purpose could it possibly have made sense? And then second, once it did get out from whatever its source, they did everything they could to block international assessments and people coming in. And that is what that is. I'm concerned on our side. What was the United States doing financing that? Why would we participate in that kind of endeavor at all? And secondly, why would we give our money to someone else through a pathway of other intermediaries when we could not oversee, supervise, analyze, audit, confirm the results as any donor or any board member would do? And now to have incomplete information and to have our own leadership provide conflicting information, incomplete information. It was the State Department that had to look across the federal bureaucracy at the National Institute of Health to say, what were you doing financing this research? And oh, by the way, give us the documentation for what you've done. And even testifying in front of Congress about 2 weeks ago, Dr. Fauci was asked by two different senators, Ron Paul and John Kennedy, tell us about the research. And did you monitor the research? How do you know the researchers did what you thought? Oh, we trusted them. Oh, okay, you trusted them. I've never had a donor or an investor completely trust. I remember what President Reagan once said, trust but verify, okay? One of the things I learned when I worked with accounting firms is you can have quality by yourself, but you cannot have quality control unless it is independently verified, okay? So it just goes from bad to worse. And it's been a long, long time in coming.
I don't know.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
No, Jim, I agree with you completely. This is something that is of most concern for everyone, all the lives that's lost. I just can't sit here and accuse Dr. Fauci. The fact is he's been there for so many years. He seems, since the last year, he seems like a pretty upstanding guy. Whatever it is that, whether he knows or not, or whether he does and covering up, reading into it, reading what he talked about, the article, this is not something that one person could cover. This comes from multiple insider people that are, yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting. It's much bigger than he is.
Oh, yeah.
He would not have had unilateral authority to make those kinds of grant decisions.
Absolutely.
He has a huge bureaucratic apparatus underneath him at NIAHI, whatever it is, National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And then his boss, Francis Collins, who's head of NIH, finances all kinds of things. It's a huge federal set of programs of all kinds of things. And for them not to have inspectors generals, auditors, scientific panels, evaluation, they have the apparatus that should have been used. And if it's not being used, even in this one set of activities, that's a dereliction of duties. I would call it, from outside the government, I would call it political malpractice. I would call it negligence. And not only because it's a dereliction of duties and a waste of federal taxpayer money, but look at the consequences of ignoring it. How many people have died? And as bad as how many people have died, look at the economic consequences and the pain that has been caused by the ripple effects of the pandemic and the shutdowns and all of this. And this is in the United States. What about the rest of the world? And we're not done with this yet. We may think here in Texas or even in the greater U.S. that we're getting it behind us now, and thankfully I think we are. But the rest of the world, particularly hotspots, a few hotspots like Brazil and India, now Taiwan, part of Australia and New Zealand are having their own, even though they have been extremely restrictive. They're beginning to have some problems as well. So we're not done with this yet.
No, we will not be done with it for a long time. I think what you said is very true. Political malpractice, that is absolutely the reason. We really have to deal with this. We need to have full transparency. This is malpractice. And speaking of malpractice, our strategic partner, essentially China, it's been, how do I separate Asian hate with this problem of China not cooperating? You know, this relates to what happened a few days ago when Senators Tammy Duckworth and two others arrived in Taiwan, Republic of China, Taiwan.
Right.
Which is still because of us, because the United States is still a one China policy. They showed up in a military plane to deliver some vaccines on a humanitarian action. But obviously, China's reaction was swift and strong. What is your take on this?
Three things, I guess. First, the first two items I'm very, very pleased with. Number one, I'm very pleased that the United States has finally, belatedly, but better late than never, viewed itself as a donor of effective vaccines. They have decided, the US leadership has now decided to distribute 5 million doses around the world. I think that is fantastic, long overdue, and actually very small compared to the size of the problem. So I hope this is the beginning of a lot more of this activity, because frankly, if we don't do this and initiate this for particularly third world countries, not that Taiwan is a third world country, but countries that are in need of this, if we don't do it, it won't get done. And I think we should do it for a humanitarian objective, but I think it will pay extremely positive dividends longer term around the world and help repair some of the tarnish that has come on America's image around the world. I think it's fantastic and it needs to be done. Number two, I think it's wonderful that this is starting in Taiwan. We as the United States need to continue to embrace Taiwan, the people in Taiwan, and tell them how much we love them and how much we want to continue to support them. And I am very pleased that it was, quote, a bipartisan visit. There were 2 Democratic senators, 1 Republican senator, and they were there for humanitarian reasons. It's a very difficult item to argue against. People were there for only 3 hours. They talked about humanitarian issues, etc. Am I surprised that the Chinese government issued such a vitriolic response? No, absolutely not. You could estimate that or predict that response before you took off. Okay, and so to me, that just shows the brittleness of the whole relationship there. And if we can help Taiwan with this and other things, I think we absolutely should do it. Is there danger? Yes. But number 3, if the Chinese government spends a lot of time and pounds the table and yells and screams, at some point they're going to have to back it up with action. And I think we need to see what their temperature actually is. But initiating a war-like response, threatening, using the term war in the response for a humanitarian gesture, I think it's well known, too, around the world that China has created a vaccine, Russia has created a vaccine, and they've been trying to donate it around the world, but apparently it doesn't work very well, either of them. The U.S.
No, that's McCarthyism. That is absolutely not true. So China's vaccine, because we're being fair here, and we want to relay the facts.
Right.
So I have to tell you from a different perspective how I feel and how a lot of people, other people in Asia feel.
Okay.
So Taiwan is being used as a pawn It's a strategic partner. But the fact is, we have always have strategic partners.
Yeah.
We did not treat Korea and Japan and Taiwan the same. Japan and Korea is of more importance than Taiwan. China has already offered to donate enough doses. There's 23 million people in Taiwan. They have enough doses to donate. But one thing is right, though. You're right. China and US, we're all using the vaccine as a tool to expand our influence and outreach under the guise of humanitarian aid. Because if you want to really be humanitarian, there are third world countries that need it more than Taiwan. And the fact is, Taiwan has 23 million people. These 750,000 doses is for show. And also, Japan just donated a week and a half ago 1.24 million doses of AstraZeneca, which is also the lowest rated vaccine out of Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, etc. Right? These are...
Yeah, the U.S. has not approved AstraZeneca yet.
Exactly. So for Taiwan's secessionist government, which is... This government is a government that is... They have a lot of problems. They're playing a game that they cannot win. If you want to talk about humanitarian, then take China's vaccine because it saves people. Don't complain and refuse to take it and say and fit the narrative. And if you want to keep it humanitarian, then send it by using an aircraft that is a United States Air Force aircraft, Air Force C-17, and going there for 3 hours for a photo op, dropping off 750,000 vaccines for a country of 23 million people. You're basically letting the DPP government play this game and use this narrative to say that, look, daddy's here to save you. Look, Jim, my point is everything is McCarthyism right now in Taiwan. If you disagree with the policy, you're a commie. If you think the government is corrupt, you're a commie. Everything that they do, there's no responsibility. It's political malpractice, as you said. Absolutely. And this is a very dangerous path. You said that, let me be clear on this. China is not sending a military aircraft to Taiwan or Korea or Japan or Philippines as a show of force to instigate and create tension with us. We are the ones sending it to them. China is not sending or trying to exert influence on Cuba or Mexico or Canada or any of our neighboring countries. We want to keep the peace there. That the goal of it, this one China policy was created by us. We want that. We kicked Taiwan out of the United Nations in the 70s and allowed Communist China in because we bowed out and kowtowed to them. So now we reverse it and say we want this and that, then declare independence. Support Taiwan in joining WHO. But we're not. We're playing with the lives of 23 million people. We gave Korea a lot more vaccine because Korea has a lot more strategic importance. My point is, I don't know if State Department understands. You want to play with fire. Well, the lives that will be lost are American soldiers. Do you want to send your kids out there? I don't want my kids to go out there and die. I don't think anyone in China or Taiwan wants war. But for China, the rules of the game is set up by us. We forced it upon them. We created it to our advantage. And now we're using the rules of the game. They're playing with it. They're adherent to the rules of the game. But we are testing it. We are bending it. We're changing the rule as we go. So I would not be surprised. I don't want to see it happen for China to react. I will not. Because let's be clear. If China was sending their warships and battle groups out of California or San Diego, the ocean, Pacific Ocean, or getting close to the Gulf of Mexico, how do you think we'll react? So,
there would be very significant resistance to that.
But that's what we're doing there, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing there. And remember, Taiwan and China is a one China policy. We agreed. We want this. So now suddenly, because China is now, because USSR has been defeated by democracy. Afghanistan, Iraq, there's no more wars. We need to find another, okay, here we go. China, they're coming up, the developed country. We agreed many for the past year that we want to have trade, want to have open dialogue. We want to have we want to have growth together without threats, without instigation, without threat of war. Do we need to stem China's global influence? We do, because we have to have our best interests at heart. China's doing the same thing. But this kind of war rhetoric is very dangerous, because I firmly believe World War III will begin in Asia, because it's a landmine out there. It is explosive. This is generations of hate. It's just like Israel and Palestine. This goes back hundreds of years. This is not just the past 20, 50, 60 years since World War II. Same thing with the balance between China, Taiwan, and Japan. Remember, Japan, imagine this, Jim. Let me put it in a perspective that we could understand as Western educated folks. Mm-hmm. Imagine that Germany is still ruled by the Nazi Party, that East Germany ended up taking over West Germany, and USSR never went away. Imagine that now we have to work with the Nazi Party so that we could suppress France and England, because France and England became more socialist. What do you think the people of France and England would feel? Because this is what we're doing with Japan and China. Japan's imperial army, the current government, the current emperor, they were never executed or punished for their war crimes. Because after World War II, Japan became of utmost importance to us because of the influence of USSR, and they backed communist China. We as the United States and the nationalist government lost China, retreated to Taiwan. Mm-hmm. We have to use Japan. Same thing in Korea. We have to maintain our influence. So we allowed the emperor to continue. Do you think the hatred of the Chinese people will go away? It will not, and it should not. This is the racial cleansing that Japan did in all of Asia is not in their history books. This generation of Japanese people do not agree and do not know this happened. They do not know what happened during World War II. They do not know what their leaders did. Mm-hmm. I am not going to sit here and say that history is written by winners. I think history needs to be both sides. You mentioned the Tulsa killing last week, and that struck me as somebody that's very pragmatic and very logical and very kind and empathetic as you, because we didn't know that history. Like, it was buried. Doesn't mean that should be buried. No, we should know, and we should learn from it. Mm-hmm. This is the same way with China, Japan, and U.S. relations. There is a one China policy. I do not want Taiwan to be communized. Nobody wants that. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean we have to keep provoking a developing country like China, knowing that that's their bottom line. We know that. There's economic competition. There's their aggressive expansionism. We can stem that. We have to do something about that. But Taiwan is something that we created. This situation, we created it. Mm-hmm. So generations of Asians are still paying for it. Remember, Korean War was fought on Korean ground. A lot of Koreans died. The Japanese invasion of China was essentially, I think there's only 2 provinces left, maybe a tenth of their country of China's was left. The rest was occupied by Japan. If Japan did not attack Pearl Harbor, there will be no China left. The United States won this war because we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. We decided to join the war effort. The Nazis will be ruling Europe right now. We will still be fine here in the United States, but the fact is, a lot of those folks there, no one will be alive, because the Japanese people do not treat any other country or race as equals. They believe they are children of the son of the god. They're gods. What they did in China is not in history books. More people died during the Japanese invasion and systematic racial cleansing than there was in the European theater. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But 1-2 nuclear bombs changed everything. And when we talk about clarity with where the virus began, we want transparency, because we don't want history to repeat. Well, we're not teaching our next generation what happened in Asia, because we're continuing this way of manipulating, instigating, and pitting each other, which is part of all foreign policy. But when it comes to saying China, provoking China and saying, why don't you do something about it, China? We set these rules and you're playing by it, but now we're going to bend the rules and provoke you. We told you it's one China, but now we're going to say, hey, we're going to send warplanes. You're going to say all these things. Why don't you do something about it? Mm-hmm. Are we being a bully? Are we instigating? Or or is this called diplomacy? I don't know about that, Jim. I don't know. And by no means I support what Beijing is doing. By no means do I think that this is the right way. But what did you expect them to do? What do you expect Beijing to respond?
I think China's response was just what you could have predicted. What comes next, I don't really know.
At the cost of 23 million lives in Taiwan, billion people in China, I mean, we've failed since World War II, we failed in every invasion, in every meddling of so-called spreading our democracy, our doctrine. Look at what happened in, I don't want to talk about South America because we lost them. I mean, we lost a lot of countries. I don't want to talk about what happened in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we could go on and on. For what? When are we going to learn a lesson that the best way to win over is from soft influence, from culture? When everyone goes to McDonald's and everyone drinks Coca-Cola and everyone listens to Elvis and watching movies produced by us, that's how they want to achieve the American dream. That's how they know. I mean, since World War II, everyone wants to come here.
And educating the top scientists, leaders that go back and actually run the countries and the business enterprises in those countries as well. And that's been a process that's been in place for at least 50 years.
But you see what happened in Venezuela. I mean, we thought we did that, right? We had our people there and it was all working out great. But some countries are not ready, or they're just not, their culture just doesn't allow this Western democracy. It's not one size fit all. Now I realize it. We're lucky that we had 200 some years of improvement. We're learning from it. You know what other countries are saying? They're saying, this is including people that I don't want to agree with this. People like Soviet, the Putin, or China, these dictators, Filipinos president, they're talking, saying things like, hey, US, what do you have to do? Like, why are you getting in our business? Why don't you take care of your racial inequality? Why don't you take care of your gun problem, mass shooting every day? Why don't you take care of your police brutality? Why don't you take care of your letting illegal immigrants in, whether you agree with it or against it, or your prison reform? You know what I mean? We have problems.
Let me interrupt you. Now you sound like the president of Guatemala lecturing Vice President Kamala Harris when she was there over the last 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, that was pretty embarrassing, actually. And
yeah, but there again, I think that was a perfectly predictable kind of response or retort. I don't know what she was doing down there, but all
who knows what they're doing?
All the things. How do you go down there and expect to win a popularity contest when you tell them that we're here to stop or get to the root causes of what's causing people to leave your country? And then you tell them face to face that they're corrupt and they're pushing their own people out. What do you expect them to say? And by the way, the Guatemalan president responded with a gentle form of the way that the Chinese, the PLA people, responded to Secretary of State Blinken about a month and a half ago when they met in Alaska. It was almost identical, the things that they said.
You know, Jim, I don't like it. Like, I don't enjoy, I take no pleasure in hearing this. I'm just relaying to what people is very logical, what we will hear. We already expect this. So why do we keep getting up there and getting slapped for it? We are helping a lot of nations. We're the strongest economic power. This is, I mean, the United States for the past 6 years is probably in human history, probably one of the most fair and least corrupt and most racially diverse place to live, to be born and to be able to live during this time without war, without poverty, without disease, with all the advances in technology and medical, we're lucky to live here, right? I mean, I tell people, hey, you could keep saying that people are lazy or it's because of your own fault. But the fact is, if you're born in USSR in the 60s, I don't care how hard you work, you're going to go to the gulag. If you're in China in the 70s, I don't care how smart or how diligent and what a good person you are, you're going to be in a camp, re-education camp, because everybody goes there and you're not making out of there because there's no food. You have to, I mean, to be born, to be here is luck already enough. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't judge other people's misfortune because of those systems. Look, Guatemala, I could talk about the corruption. We could talk about, you know what they'll say? Hey, it's your guns that are here killing people. It's United States weapons that are here in the hands of the gangs. And the gangs are profiting and thriving because they're profiting from the drugs that we use. So I really believe the first thing to stop illegal immigration is to change our drug law, because the war on drugs doesn't work. We need to rehab. We need to control the pharmaceutical companies that are writing, these scripts that are killing people. This prescription drugs are killing people. And illegal drugs, we tax them, we regulate them like what some European countries do. Everything's out in the open. We control this pandemic because the drug pandemic is a lot worse than any pandemic I know. Stop the drugs, and these gangs in South America have no more profit. Everything's legalized. They're going to be dissolved. They don't have to go back to farming, whatever it is they do. Mm-hmm. The corruption will stop because there's no more drug money. They won't need guns anymore. If we also have some gun control, we talked about this before. There's absolutely no reason. Look, I love my weapons. I love my assault weapon. I love going to gun range. I love going hunt. That's being a Texan. But I don't love it enough where anyone could get one and start to. I mean, we know there's hundreds of mass shootings in the last 3 months, hundreds every day. I have no problem giving it up just so that I don't have to be in fear when I go shop at a Walmart or at a post office. I don't want to have to carry an assault rifle just to go on and do errands. I really don't. I don't. And I have no problem giving it up. This gun right, this First Amendment right, there's a time and place. I mean, come on. When we fought for independence from British, there were militias because we have to fight against the redcoats. I don't know who we're fighting against now, but so the gun control, the war on drugs, we have to reevaluate. Then we'll stop a lot of these problems. And of course, there's no one size fit all. It's just other countries have their problems. We have ours. Mm-hmm. I just think that the best way is to use our economic and entertainment and cultural influence instead of using a big stick and a gun. And by the way, we're the largest exporter of military supply. Mm-hmm. Taiwan buys, I don't know, $100 billion worth of military from us every year. I get it. For certain industries, conflict is profitable. War and blood is very profitable. But this war and blood is not our business until it became our business. You have family and friends out in Asia, you don't want this to happen to them.
No.
You understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not a pawn. I apologize. I kept droning on because I completely disagree with what our State Department did. I disagree with Biden for continuing Mr. Trump's policy of setting up China as the enemy. We know they are influential. Are they close to us? No, but we need to find someone because this is what perpetrates Asian hate. Old Asian ladies and men and getting beat up and murdered and killed because you cannot separate this. You cannot sit there and say, hey, stop hating and discriminating Asian people while saying it's a China virus, while saying that China is the problem, China this, China that. And we're sending warplanes over there in the show for so what? Do we need to? We are in control anyway. If you want to be humanitarian and send vaccine, send it. Send it. Don't send 750,000 of them for 23 million people. And then allow the DPP, the Taiwanese government, to make a big show out of it. They did a huge news conference, blah, blah, blah. This is provoking because China already offered all of it for everyone. Japan offered it. Once they're about to expire. Does people know? There's one thing we agree, Jim, is that we know the media is manipulative and that we cannot just look at a report or news from one side. And if you don't read the news from both sides, you have to start seeing the perspective from Asian countries. It's not just from our perspective. There are a lot of disagreement within Taiwan itself. They're seeing what this government is doing. The people in control, that government is refusing vaccine for a reason. They as in that small group, the president and the people in power, they own a vaccine development company. They are waiting for their own to come out. But even though theirs will not be approved by WHO, it also hasn't been tested. But the stock price already went up 30% in the last few months. They're all banking on it. Tell me what government wants their citizens to die first. When there's vaccines available, they refuse Japan, Taiwan, China, they refuse it because they just want to make money from their own. No country would do that except for Taiwan. And the reason Taiwan's government could do that is because they're playing this game between US and China. Without this kind of pressure, they won't have that backing. They won't be allowed to because they'll be called out. Mm-hmm. So the people that are dying in Taiwan is sacrificing their lives to be a pawn in this game of, like you said, a game of a stare down. Let's see who blinks first. Mm-hmm. And that is a shame. It is an absolute shame. It's very intricate and complicated to explain what's going on in Taiwan in relation to China and US, but it's not what it seems appear to be. So I'm all for humanitarian help, but I am not for political posturing and instigation and provoking a war. If there was a war, then let the Communist Party begin it. Don't give them a legitimate reason to have a war. Don't give them more support. Because all we're doing is creating more animosity toward us and toward Taiwan. Jim, I hope you understand that this issue is a big deal in Asia, in Taiwan and China, where most of our audience are Mandarin-speaking Chinese.
Sure.
Taiwan belongs to China. Taiwan has always belonged to China. I don't care what political parties in power in China. The Communist Party cannot be in power forever. The Communist Party does not represent. Right now, everyone says they're not, they represent China. Being Chinese is being Chinese. It doesn't mean you're communist. Mm-hmm. That party doesn't represent the history, the 5,000-year history. They've only been around for 70 years. Mm-hmm. We cannot say because they're communists, then you suddenly want to be independent, that you're not Chinese anymore. Mm-hmm. That goes against everything. That there's no way. If you do a poll, there are probably 1.5 billion Chinese people around the world, over 1 billion in China. And in every country, there are a lot of Chinese immigrants. Mm-hmm. You can ask all of them, except for that 23 million, which is less than 5%, 3% of total population. There's not a single one of them will tell you Taiwan is an independent country, that Taiwan could succeed and independent. Even the ones in Taiwan, the ones in power, DPP, they know it's impossible to be independent. They could announce it right now. This is the true democracy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They have their own military, own passport. They could come on and say, we're declaring independent. We're the Republic of Taiwan. They don't do it. They use it as a ruse to continue their corruption and graft because they know the U.S. will not support it. Japan will never support it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You know, the most disappointing part of this conversation, listening to you, is not so much the behavior, the intent of the One China policy or the behavior of the CCP. That's perfectly understandable. Mm-hmm. The part that's very disappointing to me is the continued discussion of the corruption within Taiwan and the difference in the treatment of the Taiwanese people by the leadership that the people elected under the ruse of genuine democracy, and the selfish reasons of selfish behavior of the Taiwanese capitalists, which on a world-class stage are among the best in the world. It's very, very similar to other experiments around the world. I'll name Argentina as one. I'll name
Venezuela.
Venezuela is socialistic. It's kind of the other side of it.
It became socialistic in the last 20 years. Before that, they were very close to being a full democracy.
Before that, I will also say parts of Mexico.
Absolutely.
The Mexico industrial government complex, where you have a concentration of industry, and you have a very thin pyramid at the top and very, very difficult inequities around. Taiwan has a very productive middle class, but when the government does not, you can call it a democracy if you want, but if the government does not represent the interests of the people who elect it, then there is something gravely wrong. And why I bring this up in the context of the discussion you were talking about on a Chinese basis or an international basis is Taiwan will ultimately fold from within. It will crater from within. It's exactly what's happened in Venezuela. It's what's happened repeatedly in Argentina over the years, repeatedly. Okay. And look what's going on in Mexico. They're going to have a national election, and they are predicting massive violence during election day in Mexico. And Mexico, you can say what you want. I love the Mexican people. I love many parts of the entire Mexican culture, and I mean that sincerely. But it is harboring the narco states, which are some of the largest, most successful global enterprises. Now, they're not just a bunch of thugs south of our border. They are worldwide distributors of illicit drugs all around the world. I mean, these guys are as sophisticated as any private enterprise. Okay,
Jim, I appreciate you for saying. I absolutely agree. I love the Mexican people. Mexican culture, they're a proud people. They have a lot of history, a lot of culture. And remember, Taiwan has no natural resources. Argentina, Venezuela, Mexico, they're a vast country with a lot of natural resources.
Massive natural resources.
And it's being squandered.
Yeah, it's squandered. Yeah. I mean, what people have always said about Taiwan and Hong Kong, for that matter.
Narco state.
Yeah.
And we want democracy. We want this, we want that. And in the end, these cartels, these international corporations now, they have amassed so much wealth and power. Mexico, 40 years ago, they have no cartels. They're just a middleman. The Colombians, the South Americans go through them to just go through the land and pay them a tax. Right. Instead of being just a courier, that they now are the real bosses. What have we created? And this is what you said about Taiwan is the clearest and most eloquent I have ever heard from someone that has not been brainwashed by media. You're absolutely right. The collapse comes from within. When you talk about Taiwan, the Republic of China, Taiwan, they're businessmen, they're industrialists. They are the best in the world because of the previous administration, because of the last 50 years. But this last 20 years, the previous administration, nationalists, gave up control. They allowed full democracy because the people wanted it. And the people in power then, they were Western educated, they were American educated. They understood. They want to give it out. They want to have a fair competition. But instead, you gave the power to a party that are basically, we call them the Green Communist Party. We call them worse than the communists. The DPP has initiated cultural revolution in Taiwan under the rules of democracy. They have started racial cleansing. They have started saying they're not Chinese and Chinese are pigs. If you Google some news regarding what Taiwan's government did to the WHO, to the General Secretary of WHO, who is African-American, a government cannot condone and pay people to do racial smearing and slurs on an international stage. This is not accusations. These are proven. The Taiwanese government is the Gestapo of Asia. It is a shame to come back to this after all the bloodshed to get to this point of direct vote. And this gives the people of China less hope. If you ask anyone from China, this is consensus that I'm not making this up. The Chinese people from 20 years ago, from the 90s to 2000, at that time, their approval rating of the Republic of China, Taiwan was at its highest. People in China understood, because they can't compare to US. Taiwan, they're Chinese. They speak the same language, same food, separated by a strait, 50 years. They look and they go, oh, democracy does work. People are happy. Taiwanese people have all the freedom, making money, living a great life. Their passports are allowed to go anywhere. There's no restrictions on kids. And the last 20 years, that approval rating went from all-time high to all-time low. Now they're saying the Communist Party is using this as an example, saying, look at the American style of democracy. Look at what it does to you. It's the cancer, it's toxic. Now Taiwan's competitiveness is lowest out of all the 4 little dragons. Now that Taiwan has depended completely on China for trade, and look at all the political infighting, all the racial slurs. This is the negative example of what is supposed to work. Taiwan should have been a beacon to allow China to have change. Instead, it's the opposite. So it's a shame, Jim. It's a shame.
You're giving evidence to confirm my point that it is deteriorating from within. And probably what's happening is it's getting ever more brittle culturally and democratically. So
I have a headache just talking about it because my parents are from Taiwan. We fought in World War II. You know, it's very hard because it's about my parents, my grandparents' legacy. I always felt like I owed them some. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II against Japanese invaders and against the communists. My family was separated for 50 years because we escaped China because we worked with the US. And my family that's left in China was persecuted by the communists, purged. Okay. Never could get education, never get married. So many died. I don't want to start. I know I look at my father. My father's 84 years old. He didn't have kids till he's way past 40 because, anyways, he didn't see his sisters and siblings for 50 years because China didn't allow anyone to, they were locked in. Who do we blame for this? This is just the time and place, right? But this human tragedy should not be repeated. This rhetoric of war, of stare downs and who blinks first, it is such dangerous. We're at an all-time world peace right now. There's no major wars. Technology allows trade. This is the time to improve and strengthen and showcase why our system is the best and why it works. Instead, Taiwan's the example. What Trump showed China, the insurrection, the political infighting, those are such negative impressions. People do research in China for popular opinion on the streets. Some of these numbers cannot lie. I mean, it went from really high. The approval rating in the US was very high amongst the young generation until this last 4 years, until this rhetoric of China virus, Wuhan virus, beating up Asian people, blaming China. This is the last 4 or 5 years. And there's no going back from this. This is a slippery slope. Jim, I appreciate your patience for listening. I thank you for understanding. I'm so happy to hear what you just said, because I know that you did not. There's too many things to worry about here as a historian. We have too many things to study. The only source of information, in a way, is me telling you what's going on in Taiwan. But in the last few months, for you to get this deep and to say that means you fully understand why I'm saying this. We're not against a democracy like Taiwan. We're not supportive of what the commies are doing. But the fact is, what Taiwan is doing has nothing to do with China, has nothing to do with us. They are corruption inside. It's a toxic cancerous cell that will end up like some of these South American countries. And Mexico and Ecuador and Venezuela is the perfect example. Absolutely perfect. Thank you for understanding. I hope you have a great week.
We will. And we'll see you back here a week from now.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye.